So we are so honored this evening to have Marty Morehart. Rebecca helped with this immensely. Marty and his lovely wife, Patricia, come on forward. Marty and Patricia came down from the Central Coast to join us tonight. And they're here as the proud owners of the Malibu Feed Bin. And they have lots of good stories and memories and all kinds of good things to tell us, right? And one more thing, Rebecca did a tremendous amount of work just talking back and forth with Marty and trying to see what he wanted to talk about tonight. So Rebecca's going to be joining Marty and Patricia as well, perhaps in doing this interview. But Marty brought some things that we didn't even know he was going to bring. They're all on this table, articles and pictures that we didn't even expect to have. So I hope everybody comes up here and looks at them. I thought you're going to talk about them as well, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So it's an unexpected plus. Enjoy, everybody. We're honored. Thank you. My job is going to be to ask a few questions if Marty is ever short on stories to tell, or to be the timekeeper if the stories go on a little too long and we get to some others. So please don't think me rude if I say, hey, what about the next story? But we had a great time on the phone getting information for the article that went to the Messenger, and I just did the tip of the iceberg because I wanted it to be something to entice you to come. You're going to hear so much more detail. And I'm going to start with the first question to Marty and say, why the feed bin? How did it all start?
I think I got one. Thank you. How did it all start? I have to jump down there to start that.
Where should we start with the other one?
Well, okay. Patricia and I bought the store from Dale Smith, whose father was Smith of Smith Bennett Pipe and Supply. And they were one of the first people, as I understand it, to bring PVC pipe into the construction business in California. And of course, we're giantly successful. It was a little hard sell in the beginning because of all, and really you can't, that's what they use now almost entirely. But in those days it was a little hard to sell. So Dale, for whatever reasons, wanted to be in the feed business, and I think he was there for about 2 years. Meanwhile, I had bought a house in Topanga, and I think the first one was, what did we say that was? I think on Highvale. Yeah, we did a house on Highvale, Canyon Trail, and then one 3 miles up Bill Canyon, and then ultimately on Wayview. And when really it was not anything special, it's kind of just a refurbishing thing. But in 1966, everything came to a screeching halt as far as the real estate activity in the market. And I needed a real job because my wife was throwing up. Our first job was on the way. And this painting the house thing was growing old. And Dale promised me that we could make $125 a week. And and I believed him, and that's kind of what got us started in this thing. And then, if I get into some stories that happened over the years, you've got to realize I was born without any wisdom, and it's taken a long time to figure things out. And I made an awful lot of mistakes and got into an awful lot of trouble over the years. But I really am blessed with a lot of divine providence, and I think that I look backwards and I can see God was really active in my life, directing me, even though I wasn't cooperating. And so by sheer brute force or canoe paddle alongside my head, things have worked out well. So anyway, with the need for a job, we got into the feed business. I'd always had animals. We lived in an avocado grove below Will Rogers State Park. And I spent most of my adolescent years up and down the creeks, and that my firmest desire, and this is a sidebar story, but I guess I've got to say that I'm very blessed that Patricia has put up with me all these years, but there have been some very difficult times. One of the times I'm paying for the stupid marriage counselor, And I said, I told her I wanted to be in the ranching business. And she says in a high-pitched voice, but I thought he would grow out of it.
I did.
And I never did. I never did. We are in the cattle business, and it's a very important part of what we do, and at least for me anyway. And the children run the store. So Casey, my daughter, and Julie helps her run the Malibu store, and then another daughter.
Yeah, come on.
Some of the stories we're going to tell tonight happened before she was born. So anyway.
Marty, what about some of the businesses that were there 30s, 40s, and 50s before you got there?
I have a map here of when the highway made a big giant turn, and they realigned it, and it's kind of interesting. It shows some of the houses down in the rodeo grounds, and it shows our store, which then became Potter's, we have been going backwards, was actually two different buildings, and one was Potter's store, that's that picture right there. But this portion of the building, which in this picture is separated from which was the original fire station, this building here was actually out here on the corner, and the roadway came between them. And we removed the foundation part of the foundation of this building, which I can't see in this picture because Topanga is going way over there at this point. It's since been realigned. This is all now lanes, turn lanes. But before it wrapped tightly around the hill, and that was before that gas station was built, we pulled the buildings together, and I had an office up there for many years. But we kept having a problem with we could never get a good patch on where the pole was that dropped down. That was the residence from the original fire department, and there was apparently a corral out in the back, and it was a horse-pulled fire engine.
And they had the pole. The pole was there when we got the store. The pole was still there.
Well, then William Randolph Hearst at some point purchased the Topanga Ranch property, and at some point thereafter sold it to the Los Angeles Athletic Club, before Potter and between the fire department and such, and then they made this an office because they had all of the beach rentals and then all of the houses around the rodeo grounds. Those were all guest houses.
Tell us what years they are.
I can't. Okay.
This was
prior to. Okay. Hearst owned it in the 20s. Athletic Club purchased it in the late 20s, and I could be off because it might have been, but in Depression era times of 1929 to 33 in there someplace.
And they kept it until the 2000s.
They kept it right up until Gray Davis. That was the first thing he did as governor, was paid off the Hathaway family by buying that property. And so that they had it for many, many, many years. And they had quite a few rentals. There were 100 and some tenants when we were there, between the rodeo grounds, the motel, and then all of the beach houses, which have been long gone now. So I can't tell you exactly when Hearst bought it, but he was buying up everything in 1880, 1890 in there, San Simeon, and then ultimately decided on building the castle where he did. So I wish I could get tighter, but I can't. Okay. Probably we were blessed in the sense that we didn't know what we were doing, and you know, retailing was so foreign to me, and we just kept trying different things. And finally, things started to kind of go together. We were doubling sales, and as I said, we started in 66, 67, 68, things were pretty heady. 69 was a real game changer for us and for an awful lot of Topanga. That 69-70 year was unbelievable because it was followed by those fires, but the floods were tremendous, and those of you that were here certainly know what I'm talking about. We had over 180-day road closures down at that end, either because of the Topanga Rock, the big rock that was supposed to close Pacific Coast Highway, but they closed the highway anyway, and the road completely washed out down at the Narrows. So the folks that lived in Topanga could either go out the old canyon or else go out to the valley, but they sure didn't go by the Malibu feed bin. But why it was a game changer for us was that as are, you get those things back to back like that, and you think maybe it's never going to end. And I'm sure for a lot of folks that lived up in the canyon, the same thing happened, because we literally saw houses and roofs float by, and large chunks of our backyard floated away, and there were people lost, and there's a bunch of articles. I didn't realize that we still had these. But, here's an example of somebody's pickup that's got a little problem getting started. This just was so common everywhere with these pictures. You're sure welcome to look at them. And houses, and then there was another problem too. I think building code, getting a building permit in the 60s was kind of, I guess some people did it. But the reality is much of Topanga was constructed without building permits, so what is up to code? We did a lot of work up here, and I don't remember ever seeing a building inspector. So,
Good old days.
Yes.
but Topanga is wonderful. But 69 and 70, if you look at these pictures, you kind of realize that, wow, at that end of the canyon, between the mudslides and the dirt and the rain, and we at the time lived in Rustic Canyon, and that torrential rain hit there, washed out most of our yard. Patricia was rescued with a newborn by the fire department. And it was interesting, if you drove into Los Angeles, you could always tell who was from Topanga because it would have red dirt all over their car, not just a little bit, all over their car, and the other cars would all be clean. And people would come, what flood? They didn't understand what we were going through.
Well, it'd be a little trickle of water running down the streets.
Yeah.
LA or even Brentwood area.
We had our first, we were at the top of Rustic Canyon at that time, which would have been just the opposite side of it, well, all the way over behind Marquez Knolls. Those all canyons all kind of come back together again before they hit the mall. It was our first venture in the cattle business, and we were immediately next to Camp Josefo, and there were, we rented this house from my dad, and he had decided to put these pipe corrals across to keep the cows in, and we're talking about Corsair and the Scoutaromas. Well, they stored all of the plywood for the Scoutorama booths that we'd have down at Corsair Field in a Quonset hut right next to the creek. Well, when the floods came, it took that whole thing and laid all that plywood up against this pipe corral or pipe fencing. And then when it came down, we ended up with a 5-foot wave all the way across the canyon. Behind our home was a great big reservoir that was about 18 feet deep, and the next day there was a giant oak tree in it, kind of off at the angle. It wasn't going to take root because there were too many rocks in it, but our cattle were swept down the canyon, and between Will Rogers' hideout and his actual ranch house was a place that was a log cabin that he used to use, and then there was a waterfall. Actually, it was a dam that had filled up many, many years before in the 20s, and there'd be a road that went around it, and a rusted out ladder going up and down the face of it, and we kind of always dared each other to crawl up and down this thing as stupid kids. Well, once our cattle went over the edge of that thing, it was the end of them. By the time they got down to the beach at Chautauqua, they were identified as dead horses on the beach. They were that skinned up that nobody could identify what they were. But as I said, it was a game changer for us. I thought that, I guess subconsciously, I thought that maybe this thing was never going to stop, because then it was followed by the fires. And 1970, we had some amazing fires, and I was so broke that I got a wonderful guy to finance me by the name of Fred Roberts, and he had the Saltus Coral Canyon Ranch that's part of the park, and was an amazing guy. He had a chain of markets and liquor stores, Santa Monica, Culver City, West LA, and a tough little guy. He would come in and drive, just would say things to customers in jest, but nobody knew that he was a friend of mine, and just to embarrass me. And in fact, he told me I was a stupid Gentile, is what he kept saying. And customers would just, shake their head and walk away. But he was an amazing guy. And unfortunately, we had this giant wood pile that we were going to set the world on fire, but it got set on fire, and then, but he was good enough to let me pay him off for the next year or two. So I mean, I owed him a lot of money for a long time, but out of that, we realized that we had to develop some stores, and I had to get beyond the Malibu Topanga thing, and it was only because all of my dear friends in Topanga went to the valley when the road was gone, and the friends in Malibu went to Oxnard or over the hill. I mean, you couldn't get to our store, and the folks that lived up in Sunset Mesa didn't have any horses and 2 dogs. So we really got isolated, and that turned out to be just a horrible year. It was like a third of the prior year, and it just about killed us. And I'm not even sure how it all went together again, but then we started building stores other places, and everything has turned out well. I'm not going to take up a collection or anything. We've done okay. So we ended up doing 7 stores. We have 2, our first and our last, Malibu and a store in Ojai. And that name is Walker and Crane. And we have an older daughter that runs that one. And Patricia's very involved in all of them, and they're just as happy as can be if I stay out of the stores. I'm assured weekly that I don't have to come up there. They still get me to haul pumpkins and firewood and stuff like that. So I spend most of my time hauling avocados or doing our farming thing, and I have help on that. And then we then got involved in doing cattle in a more legitimate way, and for years we leased a lot of ground, actually everything from Ventura to Carpinteria and back to all of those oil fields. And we did that for 11 years, I guess, and we're finally able to buy kind of our home ranch up in Lockwood Valley. So that's kind of what we're doing now.
It has to be on to pick it up with the recording equipment. Am I on?
Yep.
Now, one of the things we talked about on the phone was some of the delivery stories that you had, because not only would the feed bin sell things, but they delivered through the rain, the mud, and some unusual customers. Anything you want to share?
Well, I was telling her,
Some things
Rebecca,
you
we've had some unusual deliveries, and there was a point in Topanga history, and it may still go on, I don't get up here often enough, but that clothing was almost optional, and and I'm not going to mention the guy's name because I think he's a very legitimate recording artist today and is very conservative. But in those days, I think he was out of his mind. And he looked like a buffalo, very hairy guy. And I can remember one of my drivers, who was a pretty conservative guy, his wife worked for Hanna-Barbera. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Okay, because we were trying to remember that name. His name was Tom Victory, and a nice guy. And he came back and he was shaking. He says, "You can't believe what happened to me." And he said, I took the directions she gave me and all of that, and all of a sudden I'm going along and a guy bangs on the window and he appears to have his shirt off, and I kind of lean over to open the door. We didn't have electric windows in, and he jumps in and he's just completely naked, and it's I have to drive up the hill with him, and it just kind of, if you're prepared for it, I guess you can mentally make the adjustment. But I don't want to do that delivery anymore.
And he wouldn't do the delivery anymore.
So we've had on the delivery front, and then getting our trucks stuck in almost everybody's yard. Those wet years are really tough on, because people don't keep their horses in their front yard or right on their driveway. It's always down in the back. And I'm off. In fact, I think Gary, didn't I get to have to tow a truck out of your yard one time or something? Right. And it's sure great to see some faces here. I mean, Norman Carlin, I haven't seen him in many years, and Gary, I haven't seen Gary in 20 or 30 years, and my friend over here, Mr. Marvel. So that was, it just, a lot of you haven't seen it in an awful long time, which it's neat.
I think there's some stories too about how you made some house calls to ill chickens, that when they didn't want to go to the vet.
At the time, it was interesting.
You need to tell the story about the goat story.
No. Okay. All right. We used to get these calls all the time. There was a Dr. Armstrong down on Sunset Boulevard, and up a little ways, and Eric Hughes and Dale Brooks were in Malibu, and there was no vets in Topanga, and there was somebody out over in the valley. But generally, Dale would tell people, well, call Marty, he knows a little bit about chickens or goats or whatever. Dr. Armstrong didn't like the small animals, didn't like livestock, and wanted to limit his practice to dogs and cats. And so oftentimes when it came to a $3 chicken or a $2 chicken or whatever it was, people would call us. And one of the incidences that I think I was sharing was that this one lady, in fact, she ended up buying our house in Malibu, which was really weird. Many years later, she had married a real city guy, anesthesiologist, yeah. I liked her, but he was kind of a jerk. But she wanted to do this incubation thing, so I got her some goose eggs. And it took me a long time to learn that when you get involved in that and you give somebody something like that, or even sell them something, you have some sort of ongoing responsibility as to how they hatch and all of that.
And so, if they hatch?
If they hatch, and it's kind of sort of your fault type of thing. And so I get this call that they're coming out, and so I'm getting this, I think Pam was having a baby, but I'm getting all of this progress. There's 3 cracks in the shell today and all that stuff. And what had happened is that apparently she was gone and she let the humidity drop in the goose egg. And goose and ducks need more water in their incubator than chickens do. I mean, the chicken's like an upland game. You want dry hatching there, but with the waterfowl, they need to have water. And what had happened is that as that bird is developing in the egg, they start absorbing that egg white back into the center of their chest. And if, to make a long story short, the bird's half in and half out, but it's stuck, the shell is stuck right here. So we have, I'm sorry about that. I forgot about that. Anyway, so I spent most of the evening helping her pick this off, but he kept worrying about whether we were going to expose the lung or what we were going to do trying to get the eggshell off. The bird did survive. It did have a funny colic here in the front of its breast where the eggshell was stuck. And then one of the other things that and Patricia reminded me of this one, we had a turkey. And one of the problems with the turkeys that we have for Thanksgiving, that kind of thing, is they're bred to just get very big very quickly. And if you keep them for pets, you usually have leg problems. Now, there are more wild turkey available. Now, wild turkey strains that are available, and those are a longer, leaner bird. But when you use the old bronze turkey deal that we used to sell for barnyards, they usually get a leg problem. And we had a turkey that was either ours or came back. And it wasn't walking. Well, but if a turkey quits walking, everything quits. I mean, it's kind of like all of its digestive system is dependent on it walking. And so we had to build a hammock in our back porch where this turkey would walk on its back feet. And we kept it alive for about a month with a turkey baster, feeding it chicken mash and something. And then the other one was there was another story that was sort of unusual. Again, we lived at the top of Rustic Canyon at the time. Some dogs had gotten in, and this was 46 years ago because for our first child, I gave her a little baby pig. It was a Duroc.
Some women get jewels.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any idea that it was going to be as big as that table at some point.
And her name was Spammy.
Yeah, Spammy. But Spammy was a sweetheart. She was really a cute, had a tremendous personality. But Spammy got tangled up with some dogs, and they really ripped her up. And so I had to take her to Dale Brooks and Eric Hughes, and they sewed her up, and there was hundreds and hundreds of stitches in her. She really got ripped up. And so we kept her at the store so we could doctor her every day and take care of her, and she just had a wonderful time. I mean, just about as happy as she could be. But then she got to where she'd lift the corral up and go tear all our grain up. And so I had to get rid of her, but at the time my pickup was doing something, and I can't remember what it was, but I had this guy that was a customer of ours, lived up here in the canyon, and he'd haul trash to the dump for people, one of those we haul trash type of thing. And I said, I'll give you $10 if you'll haul this pig back to my house. And he said, no, but I'll do it for 15. And it was 10 miles each way. So go down Pacific Coast Highway, you go out on up Temescal, I guess, and then out Sunset Boulevard to Rustic Canyon. Well, I guess before he could get to Sunset Boulevard, the pig had lifted the rack off one side and lifted the rack off the other side and was just had her head over the side of his truck like a dog. And he was afraid that she'd jump out if he stopped, so he just kept going. That's probably the best $15 we ever spent. She used to go down and raid. She was so big that she'd go down and raid the neighbors. There was a horse ranch immediately below us, a border, and in those days we didn't have plastic trash cans, so we had galvanized trash cans, and they were very expensive. And this gal would get in the pan, but to get the last bite in the garbage can, she'd split the seam. So it wasn't just a bag of barley that I had to buy the people that do trash can too. And her demise was that she got into somebody's trash can and ate a wine bottle, I think, and hemorrhaged. And we had a funeral for her, but that wasn't the worst thing in the world that happened.
We also talked about the changes in the horse business, kind of moving to small animals and pets, and there were some legal things with Arabians or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. When we started, there were probably 60 or 70 horses down in the rodeo grounds proper, and then Brookside Lane, which is kind of about the big first turn there. And this was all the vacation houses that people had converted to full-time residences. And they actually had a rodeo arena, and that rodeo arena, incidentally, if you go back to the Fernwood fires, and I didn't have a chance to go through these articles, but one of the Fernwood fires, some horses got killed, and probably because they were up too close to a building that burned. And if you remember, the Fernwood Pacific fires were pretty devastating, but narrow roads, no water pressure, and when I say no water pressure, they had no water when the fire started, and everybody would get down at the bottom of the canyon and wanted to water the roof, so there was no water at the top. And so the next time there was a fire, and it seemed like we had a cluster of them in those days, some good or well-meaning person went around and let all the horses out. Now, I don't know if they're in this room or not, but that was a bad deal because the first fire truck, these horses are running them down the streets, and horses do that when they're out. They just have this sense of freedom, and they just can't wait to run on asphalt, it seems, and we've certainly had our share of those kind of issues. But this horse ran right into a fire truck, and of course it killed the horse, but the fire truck got stopped. And I guess, the horses were, there was the consensus was if the truck had gotten up to the top, they could have put the fire out and the house wouldn't have burned down, that kind of thing. So there was a lot of concern about that. So what happened then is, to some degree, and I don't know how it came up because I really wasn't the organizer, but we ended up being the recipient of the Great Horse Rescuers for the following fires. And so people would bring horses down and just tie them to our fence. Of course, there's a big haystack there, so they didn't worry about that. And we would then kind of transport them or move them, lead them by hand down to the rodeo grounds where there was a big arena. And the arena wasn't very good. It wasn't anything very fancy, but there were enough boards there. And we'd hold the water, we'd take water troughs down and water them and things like that. The problem was, though, is that 2 weeks later, you'd still have some horses and no way to identify who they belonged to. But somebody realized they had an easy deal on the feed. So, our corner over the years, it's been amazing how things have changed, because the school buses used to not come up the canyon and would drop the children off there. We'd have kids there all day long, but we knew in some cases we'd even give them jobs. Little kids that were just great. You would never do that anymore. Times have changed. So, but we used to be the drop off after school every day. The same little kids.
They actually still do have some.
Okay. Well, and then whenever there's a fire or a flood or whatever, the telephone. Oh, and here's another story that was kind of interesting. We learned until recently, the command center for the fire department, we'd always gripe about not having the response time here in the canyon in Malibu. Well, the reason was that the command center for the fire department that did all the coordination was on Sunset Boulevard at the east gate of Bel Air. Gary, you probably thought of that deal. That was probably your idea. Okay. The problem was that they all had different frequencies. So you'd get a Elk Grove fire department down, and they weren't on the same frequency that LA County was. They had no coordination. The police and the fire department could not speak on the radio. They'd have to go to the command center. Well, the line of sight there was a mountain in the way, so they couldn't even talk from the engine of the command center. They had to use a hard line. We're the only one there.
Yeah, so they got easy on.
So they would take over the store. We got a fireman.
During that 69 fire, all the fire communication lines broke down.
Yeah, they did. That's right.
They didn't have anything in there.
But we had all those guys with the white helmets lined up to our store all night long, and we made coffee for them so they could call the place down. And I mean, they actually had to use the telephone to call the command center off Sunset Boulevard down there. I mean, it was the most amazing, ill-prepared thing I'd ever seen in my life. You know, we wondered why it took forever to ever get a response time. But I hope they've improved that.
Hey, what about horseback riding on the beach? I mean, we all kind of romanticize over that one and understand that there was some of that, but then it stopped.
Yeah, and a lot of people would trailer down behind us, and then you could of course wonder where Topanga Creek was. That bridge is pretty big, and that was very, very common to trailer down, or for those folks to be riding up and down the beach, Topanga Beach, underneath the pier there, not under the pier, under the bridge. And that was pretty much a daily event. They had a lot of little beach houses there, but they were all pretty small. But nobody ever griped
I
about it.
remember we had a hitching post out in front of the store too, and a lot of people would come up and tie their horse up and come into the store and then get back on the horse and ride up the camp.
That was neat when they did that, but
When did they stop?
well, when the state took it over, and if you remember, that was kind of a big fumble on their part. They bought off the people on the beach, all got paid a lot, and then when it came to rodeo grounds, they just kind of tore their houses down, and a lot of problems there. But as soon as the state took it over, they blocked all of that off. And then, of course, there weren't any, the first thing they did is that great park that you and I have all been paying for just grows rattlesnakes and poison oak at this point. It's been an amazing event.
One of the stories that we're really curious about is that one of your neighbors became rather infamous, and I think you told me that you're mentioned in Helter Skelter, the feed bin was mentioned in Helter Skelter 7 times. So what was it like having the Hanson family next door?
I told you I was born without any wisdom, and it was a very slow deal coming. And
It gave a whole new meaning to hippies.
they're kind of an interesting deal. If we were trying to build a business and start a business, and along with the free love was free anything, and so we had a terrible problem with shoplifting and stuff like that. And we really did have a theft problem. And one day there was a reasonably good break-in, and all of the bridal silver and stuff, the cases were all kicked in, and a lot of damage that didn't need to be done if you were just going to steal stuff. And I followed a trail of it out the next day. Police couldn't figure anything out, and I happened to get out in the back, and I noticed a spur up on the top of the chain link fence and a couple of conchos on the other side, and went into this guy's attic right next door. We didn't know anything about who they were or anything else, other than there was just a whole lot of people in and out of there, about 20 people living in a 2-bedroom house. Our biggest concern at the time was that the septic system there was overflowing, and I had this green pond in front of our store that every time a car went through it, you just gag. You didn't get anybody to do anything about it, and so these people would just give you a smart aleck answer. And so I'm not sure exactly what happened, but all I know is that, I shouldn't say that. There was a confrontation later that day, and I was in pretty good shape in those days, and I hit this guy as hard as I could, and I'm not proud of this but I left him for dead, and they dragged him off later, and of course the cops come down to arrest me, and this thing goes on. But the cops say, "Marty, we hate to do this. We know these guys are really bad guys." I didn't know what bad guys were, and I just knew they were stealing stuff from us, and they were a real annoyance. And we make a citizen's arrest. We don't have any ideas how many people are in the the building, and we walk in, and we go to do the citizen's arrest on something, and one deputy who's brand new on the job handcuffs this person. Well, this person hauls off and kicks him, and he falls down and dislocates his shoulder. So we've got one deputy down there. I'm here, and I'm supposed to have my hands behind my back as if I'm handcuffed, and so they would come out, and this other deputy here. And all of a sudden, we got a brawl. It's unbelievable. And he's able to get on his radio. There was some support out of the deal. I think we were responsible for wrecking 2 squad cars. I mean, they actually tore the interior out of the squad cars once we started loading them in. Police brutality was a big, giant effort at that time, and I remember having this one fellow down on the ground, and he's screaming police brutality, and Highway Patrolman finally shows up with a shotgun and cranks a shell into the chamber. Well, that noise is something that nobody forgets about. And the guy literally wet his pants, but he didn't keep quiet after that. We had some problems there. We had some real problems. And what I didn't find out until afterwards is all this stuff is being recorded, and we don't know about it. And one time, I had about had it, and I put this sign up on our bulletin board: if you hate cops, next time you're in trouble, call a hippie. And the paper picked it up, apparently, because I don't know how else it could have shown up. Years later, we're having a problem, and we're hearing about the Manson family and all this stuff. We don't know it, but we aren't making the connection. And a couple years later, maybe just 2 years later, this whole Manson thing blows up. And we see a guy's named Richard Hirsch, who is the defense attorney for one of the girls. He lives in Palisades, maybe still there, I don't know. And okay, and that's all I remember, okay. And then years later, a year or 2 later, we're hoping at Christmas time, and we've always done a big hot apple cider thing.
It was longer ago than that. It was a longer time.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, it was in the 70s, okay,
Yeah.
I know that. And we are late at night and Christmas time, and we've got Christmas carols playing and hot apple cider. And some guy walks in, and he looks like a buffalo, he's pretty shaggy, and he's hauling out 5 glasses of apple cider. And I said, "Hey, pal, you're overplaying your hand." And he said, "I got friends outside." Now, I gotta tell you, I don't do this anymore, obviously, and I'm kind of ashamed of some of the things I've said in the past, and a lot of the things I've done. But you asked, so. I said to him, "What's wrong?" They got a broken leg, and we had a big half barrel. We used to sell these great big giant wine barrels, and he takes that hot apple cider and pours it on the baby rabbits. And I jumped over the counter and took the guy right out of the store, but I didn't realize that he had 4 friends out there. And the brawl started, and then I realized that they're out, I don't know how many holes I had in my shirt that night, but
Shredded
they all had knives. And so I figured the only way I'm going to make it here tonight is if I can get out in the middle of the Topanga in the Pacific Coast. I don't want to be out in
His
the
younger
intersection.
sister and her husband had come in to get a Christmas tree. And so
And
they
so
were in the store when this
We
all happened.
rolled around for a long time, and I was doing pretty well until I hit the curb and went down. And ultimately, I ended up getting stabbed, and the knife stuck in the back. I was on my back and on the ground, and
And 2
he
guys
was trying-
holding him and
trying
one
to
guy
get me.
hitting him.
And the knife was able to kick, and when he did, the knife stuck in the back of my leg, right in the joint, and then he couldn't get the knife out. And so, anyway, make a long story short,
5 days
that's
before Christmas.
that's when you're stupid. You do those things, gosh, it was a mess. But the deputies were sympathetic because they knew they had more insight into this thing than I did. So one day they called me up and they got a description of all that stuff, and this was an attempted murder type thing. And so they were on it, and one day they called me up at Joe Calvin's nursery because they had a car stop to a van. Sure enough, it was these same guys. What it was is they had a UPS van, and they were hauling drugs down to Hollywood from Port Hueneme, and they wanted a reason to stop them because they knew what these guys had been up to. I didn't know anything about it. And so it goes to trial, and what do you know? They pull out this Richard Hirsch again as their defense attorney. The guy has had 22 felony arrests, no convictions.
The guy that stabbed him.
And he's hauling drugs back and forth, or from Miami down into Hollywood. And Well, anyway, he got off. It turned out to be my fault. So
You put that knife in your knee.
well, he came up with that picture that I had on the bulletin board.
But the interesting thing, the defense attorney called our home, and now that we're talking about months and months, maybe 6 to 8 months before this ever even went to trial, and he calls me and he wants to know if I still have the shirt and the pants. Well, it was shredded, and the pants were shredded.
The guy,
And so
they did such a terrible
I
job.
taught it. I tossed it, and he goes, "Oh, you did?" And I'm thinking.
Anyway, it was just some
And
of
so he's,
the.
and they said that unless, I said, you mean you're gonna tell me that this man could get off? The only way he would have gotten off is if he had murdered my husband, and he goes, pretty much.
So anyway,
Yeah, but we're gonna shift a gear here because you also talked about all the wonderful people that came into the school. All the friends, the good connections, the people who would
one of
call
the
you
things
for road
that we
conditions.
started, and we've got all sorts of pictures of our lovable mud contest, and maybe some of you will know who some of the people are.
Yeah, that's.
But we used to have these pumpkin contests and dog washes and the pumpkin growing. And the deal with the pumpkin is you had to have 5 feet of stem because otherwise they'd go try to buy big pumpkins.
And we'd give out the seeds usually.
And the Big Mac seeds. And then I found a big pile of and there's something, the gal Evelyn Hale was a very fancy dog trainer at the time, and she was sort of insulted when I asked her to do this. We finally got the lady at the paper to talk her into doing it because this was the most lovable mud, and we had the ugliest dog award and things like that, and she was, one of those, whatever the big dog.
We got a lot of kids though, a lot of families.
A lot of people,
We were
and then
trying
dogs
to
that
do
show in
things
costumes
together.
and all of that. So we got a bunch of those pictures. The characters that we were talking about earlier, John Nordine, you've got his Cadillac. I'm going to talk about Gary, but he's here, so I got to be careful. There's just a bunch of people that over the years that have been great characters. Bob DeWitt came to mind as I was coming over the mountain, coming over from the valley. And what a character he was, and one of the stories that I can remember is this would have been in the earlier 50s, my dad was looking at a piece of ground up here, and he found Bob DeWitt to be a real character, and we were standing out on the edge of the property, and it could have been right here, for all I know, and Bob goes up and does this jungle call, or yell, and a minute later, somebody's doing it on the other side, and it's turned out it's his wife, and they're communicating. Gary was saying that he used to put for sale signs on Gary's dad's property, and they said, "Hey, wait, it's not for sale." I said, "Oh, I know, but maybe somebody will look at it and want to buy something else." So those were all Topanga was really famous for those handmade signs. I mean, he never had.
They were beauties.
Yeah. A lot of fun and a lot of time. Norman Carlin's here someplace. Norman's an old. I'm sorry, Norman, not old. We've been friends for a very long time. So a lot of times, and I really did enjoy those years. And as I said, that's why that 1969-70 was a game changer for us. I had to go do something else too.
Probably just one more question and then we'll turn it to the audience. But what's happening with the Big Bend today? What new changes can we look forward to and things like that?
Okay, remember now.
You have to put a plug in now.
Okay, well, thank you. We're owned by the state of California, and our location, and the state has these grand plans of a lagoon and an estuary where we are, and we've seen the plans and we aren't on the plans. And so we've always been very concerned about that.
Nothing is on the plans.
Yeah, it's
There's
a clean
nothing
deal, but
on the plans
it
except
looks pretty
green.
other than,
Very pretty.
nobody's got the elevations figured out or anything else. So we've always been very concerned about that. But we have never had more than a 30-day lease on that property. We have always been month to month for 50 years.
No, 40, we're going into our
49.
48th year, 49th year.
Yeah, next year we're going to have a party. We will have been.
Not necessary.
Yeah, our business will be 50 years old, and we'll both be 70.
And we'll have been married 50 years.
And we'll be married 50 years. That's right. That's what's going to go on. I'm glad I thought remember
If we
that.
make that.
God willing, the state is going to keep putting off trying to develop that. We've gone to a couple of meetings that were very pessimistic because the people really didn't like what we were doing. it's, you know, we've tried to keep it family oriented. I don't see how we're going to change that. We love getting kids in there. Our games and contests and the dog wash and all that, the attendance dropped so bad because people are so busy. You know, when we started there, nobody played soccer. That was something you did in South America, and of course we had one of these things. So those are all of the things that are occupying kids' times now, and it's pretty tough to compete with that stuff. But our customer base has been very, very good to us. We've been up and down. We've had good years and bad years, but generally that store's been very forgiving, and we're very grateful to have been doing what we've been doing so long.
I want to take this moment to see if there are any questions from the audience. If you want it recorded, you got to come up and speak.
So we're among friends here, right? So what's the gnarliest Gary Cheney story you can tell? Gnarly.
See, I don't know who his ex-father-in-law is. That's the problem. I don't know. I'm not going to get into that, Gary. What should I tell about you?
Oh, not much to tell. I can't tell anything.
What was that, a 56 Ford that you drove around for a long time?
49.
49? Okay, nice.
And the 57 Chevy pickup.
Yeah, that was orange, the 57?
I still have the orange.
That was orange, okay, all right. And Norman had, and he's got a Scout now, which I'm kind of got this International Harvester fever, but then he had a Jeep Commando for years, and we'd load pellets. I was never impressed with the suspension, because every time we'd throw a bag of pellets in it for his old horses, it'd get lower. So.
Any more questions from the audience?
Thank
Okay,
you.
I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Do you ever know a guy named Mike Thompson up there near Josepho?
Mike Thompson?
Yeah, he had an old cop car, and he said he rolled a 57 T-Bird off that road up somewhere up in there.
I found it dead. 2 kids, actually, Camp Josepho Road. These kids had had an Austin Healey Sprite, you know, and my dad calls me and says, Marty, there's somebody standing in my bedroom covered with blood. And he says he was in a car wreck. And I figured that if he was coming out of the canyon, it had to be on one of the turns between Josepho and where my folks were. And I went up there and found it, unfortunately, and that was a bad deal. Austin Healey Sprite did a somersault and landed on his top. But that's, I mean, it could have easily happened. I mean, there was a lot of...
Well, no lights on that road, none whatsoever.
Well, potholes, and there just wasn't a road to be driving fast on. But, no, I don't specifically remember it.
Big old barrels guy.
Yes, sir.
Did the press pick up on your little sign? Well, I forgot the exact wording. If you're
in trouble, yeah, something like that.
call it.
It was in the paper, I think, and that must have been the way the guy got it, because I can't imagine, and this was many years before, but it said that I had an attitude.
This is related, but I was living in Boston at just that same time, and the Fraternal Order of Police in Boston took out a gigantic billboard in Copley Square that says, "The next time you're mugged, call it hippie." There was so much police hostility at that time.
There really was.
Oh, there was.
Oh, terrible.
Yeah.
That was their reminder, and it seems that the wording is pretty close. Maybe your fame spread all the way to Boston.
No, I don't think so. But there was, but you know, there was a real lawlessness thing that took place that came out of that. The 60s was really an amazing time when you look back. I mean, the world seems like it's out of balance now, but 1960s was something else. You know, and then, as I said, those fires and floods really did change a lot. An awful lot of people moved out of Topanga, moved out of Malibu. We were able to buy a house because the market was just dead. I mean, no buyers at all until you take a minimum down payment.
And then 2 months after we move in, we have another Malibu fire. And he's up trying to save the firewood that we didn't own. And I'm at the store and they won't let me go through and find him. And he was gone for almost 2 complete days. And I couldn't get up there to see, you know, where he was or anything else. So.
Fun times. We had a lot of fun times.
Exciting.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you so much.
can't read